Today, we are going to be talking about the tragic story of a Hollywood starlet who, after her passing, would not be found for a whole year before anyone even noticed. Today, we are discussing the fascinating but tragic story of actress and former playmate Yvette Vickers. Before we get started, please remember to subscribe and at least flirt with that like button before hitting it. Thank you for watching and enjoy. Yvette Vickers was born on August 26 of 1928 in Kansas City, Missouri. Her original birth name was Yvette Lola Vader. Her mother and father, Charles and Iola Vader, were both singer-songwriters and played in a band together called the Chuck Vader Trio. By 1936, the family moved to California permanently. By the time Yvette graduated from high school, she attended college in Los Angeles to study journalism. It was said that Yvette was a very smart and intelligent woman who took her studies very seriously. While at college, Yvette spontaneously decided to take an acting class, and she was surprised to find that she really enjoyed it. She ended up liking it so much that she immediately changed her major from journalism to drama. Yvette started small by appearing in some television commercials. Her very first job was a modeling job where she would appear in an advertisement for White Rain shampoo. After the White Rain commercial aired on television, Yvette endearingly became known as the White Rain Girl. Once her work concluded, Yvette continued on with her pursuit of acting. In 1950, Yvette landed her first role in a movie called Sunset Boulevard, and it was around this time that Yvette would officially change her name from Yvette Vader to Yvette Vickers. Between 1957 and 1958, she would star in a number of films like Reformed Schoolgirl, Shortcut to Hell, I Mobster, and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. As far as her dating life went, Yvette had an extensive dating history. She was rumored to have relationships with a couple of well-known actors like Cary Grant and Jim Hutton. In 1953, Yvette met a man named Don Prell, who was a bass player for the band called the Bud Shank Quartet. The two tied the knot and purchased a home together on West Wanda Street, which was the same home Yvette would spend the rest of her life in. In her later life, she would sadly live in the home without Don. Cracks in their marriage began to show due to their extremely busy work schedules, which did not allow them to spend much time together. There was an evident rift forming between the two of them, a rift that would only worsen as the years passed. One time, Don had left town for a big cross-country trip. When he returned home, he expected his wife to greet him at the door as she always did. Instead, Don came home to an envelope with his name on it. The letter was from Yvette, and it stated that she wanted out of their marriage, and in 1957, the couple were officially divorced. Yvette would get married 2 more times, but both relationships were unhealthy and short-lived. After her last movie, Yvette's career would be put on hold because Yvette started getting a high amount of offers to appear in men's magazines. In 1959, she was featured in Playboy magazine and was awarded Playmate of the Month for her centerfold in their July issue. Following this, she became in high demand and would be featured in several more adult magazines. Yvette was now a huge figure in the pinup modeling world and had made a great deal of money doing it. When the 60s rolled around, she dabbled back into the acting world again. In 1963, she starred alongside Paul Newman in the movie HUD. While filming, many rumors were circulating that Yvette had some kind of romantic relationship with her co-star Paul Newman. His wife had become wildly jealous, even though nothing had transpired between the two. Paul's wife, named Joan Woodward, would stay on set while they filmed and would even interject to the two filming love scenes. As a result, many of Yvette's scenes were cut from the movie, casting a shadow over Yvette's role. Although Yvette commonly played a mistress in her films, she never once had been reported having an affair in her career, not once. Yvette knew that this is what comes with the territory, but she felt like she was being punished for something she did not do. Following this, her career never really seemed to pick back up again, and Yvette would pick up part-time work as an estate agent. In her later life, Yvette had changed from the vibrant person she once was. Sadly, the social butterfly had now become withdrawn and would become a sort of recluse. Friends would say that Yvette became extremely paranoid that someone was stalking her and would somehow cause her harm. It is still unclear if someone was actually stalking Yvette or if this was something she had just imagined. Despite this, she 100% believed that someone was following her, which meant that she never left her home. The majority of the time, Yvette kept to herself, so it was not unusual for days or weeks to go by without anyone seeing or hearing from her. She also had stopped talking to her family and was no longer in communication with anyone. She mostly stayed inside her Benedict Canyon cottage home in Beverly Hills and kept to herself. Fast forward to April 27th of 2011. It's late afternoon, and Yvette's neighbor by the name of Susan Savage is passing by Yvette's house in her car. She noticed that Yvette's mailbox was packed full to the brim and was now overflowing. It had been full for a while now, but Susan became especially concerned because she noticed spider webs forming around the stacks of old and yellowing mail. Susan, who was also an actress, was not really on speaking terms with Yvette and hadn't spoke to her in years, despite them being neighbors. At one time, the two were friendly, but this ended when the two had a minor disagreement over Susan's dog getting loose in Yvette's yard. Something small and quite trivial. Regardless of this disconnect between the women, Susan still wanted to, of course, check on Yvette to make sure she was okay. So she approached Yvette's home and tried knocking on the front door multiple times, but she received no response. Susan considered returning to her home later on, but something just didn't feel right. So she made her way around the back side of the home, taking the steep stairs that led to the back door. Susan then realized she couldn't gain access using the back door as the entryway was oddly barricaded. Susan then took a quick glance through a cracked window when she suddenly gasped and jumped backwards. Through the window, Susan saw strands of blonde hair draped across the floor. Susan said that this caused her to shriek like a cat. As she looked closer, her eyes focused in on the hair strands on the floor, but then she discovered it was a false alarm. The blonde hair had simply come from a wig that had fallen to the floor. Susan composed herself and then reached her hand inside the cracked window, bending her arm sideways to undo the latch. She managed to get the window open, finally allowing her to enter the home. Upon stepping inside, Susan was immediately hit with a wave of heat. She suspected the heater had been left on, causing a foul smell to emit through the home. Before proceeding, Susan announced herself and called out Yvette's name, but only silence followed. The downstairs living space had an eerie and strange stillness to it. Susan began to feel lightheaded as growing dread began to grow inside of her, and she began to fear the worst. Susan scanned her eyes around the downstairs area and continued deeper into the home. The living room looked reminiscent of an episode of Hoarders. The stained walls were surrounded by stacks of trash that included multiple bottles of Harvey's Bristol cream and jugs of Chardonnay. Ivy plants from the outdoors were outgrown and had now wrapped themselves into the interior. Susan noticed stacks of fan mail scattered across the floor. The untouched mail and letters had begun growing mold on them and were laced with cobwebs. A terrified Susan once again began calling out Yvette, repeatedly shouting her name. She again received no response. With great difficulty, Susan made her way to the upstairs level despite all the barriers. She had to swat away trash, crumpled papers, and the boxes that stood in her way. This is when she came across the space heater, which was found out to be the cause of all the muggy heat. She turned it off right away and continued. Upon entering the upstairs bedroom, she first noticed a daybed in the corner of the room. She looked down towards her feet, and that is when something caught Susan's attention. On the floor was a landline phone that was off the hook and disconnected. The phone was strewn on top of a pile of clothes. Susan bent down to inspect further, as there was just something strange about this pile. Between the clothes, she noticed something peeking out, something that looked like more strands of blonde hair sticking out. That is when Susan stopped dead in her tracks. This time, what Susan saw was not a wig or a false alarm. Susan had come across Yvette's lifeless body. Upon seeing this image, Susan began screaming and frantically ran straight out of the home. Susan immediately called the police to seek help. Following their investigation, the police were able to conclude that Yvette's body had been sitting in the home for almost a whole year without anyone ever noticing. Her body sat there idle for so long that it was now in the state of mummification. The medical examiner's report stated specifically that her body was in a state of severe, advanced decomposition. Her appearance was so bad and so obscured that police were initially unable to determine her gender. Upon collecting Yvette's bills and finding the dates when her phone calls stopped, police pieced together and determined that Yvette had more than likely passed away in August of 2010, officially 8 months before her body was found. Her neighbor Susan drove by Yvette's home multiple times and had noticed that her lights were always switched on. This led her to believe that Yvette was home, and she never suspected anything was wrong. You may wonder how her power was not shut off at some point during those 8 months, but depending on the state you live in and your electric company policy, some companies will not shut off your power due to a delinquent bill. This was the case for Yvette, and her power stayed on the entire time. After an autopsy was performed, no signs of foul play were found, and the county medical examiner determined her cause of death to be the result of heart failure from a coronary artery disease. Due to her severe decomposition, only 56 pounds of her body remained, which made it difficult to get an exact cause of death. Yvette was 82 years old, and because of her older age, heart failure was deemed to be the cause of death, but it seemed no one could be 100% sure due to the long period of time that passed. Following the discovery of Yvette, some members of the public would come out to express their condolences. Hugh Hefner would voice his sorrow as he was very sad and upset by her death. He felt that the way she passed was an extremely lonely way to go, and I couldn't agree with him more. Writer Stephen King also paid his respects and made a statement which read as follows: "When I lay in bed at night listening to the wind in the trees or the rats in the attic, it was not Debbie Reynolds or Sandra Dee that I dreamed of. Instead, it was Yvette Vickers." Yvette's tragic story would make national headlines, and she would finally catch the attention she so desired. I want to add that the way everyone measures success is very different. There are a lot of articles on the internet that discuss how Yvette never really made it to a certain level of stardom and how she never became this kind of huge household name. I don't believe this is a fair narrative. Yvette was featured in numerous movies, television shows, and was also featured as a dancer on multiple variety shows. She had the honor of becoming known as one of the best playmates that Playboy magazine has ever featured, according to Playboy directly. Yvette earned enough throughout her career to live a luxurious and comfortable lifestyle, retiring in her beautiful Beverly Hills home. So my point is, she did have a wonderful career that deserves to be celebrated. I will close this out with a quote directly from Yvette herself. She said, quote, "Don't make yourself an open book because an air of mystery is always intriguing." Thank you for watching. If you would like more stories on women, do not forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.